Hello and welcome to today's webcast, Supporting Critical Business Processes During COVID-19. Can Managed Services Provide the Answer? My name is Victor Anderson. I'm Global Content Director of WatersTechnology, and I'll be your host today. Today's event is sponsored by SmartStream Technologies. As you will see on your screens, we have a great lineup today, including John Berkery, who is Managing Director of Investor Services at Brown Brothers Harriman, or BBH as it's known. John is just south of Boston today. We have Joe Lodato, who is Managing Director, Global Head of Compliance Technology and Surveillance at Guggenheim Partners. Now, Joe has sat on many panel discussions at our New York events over the years, and so some of you will no doubt know him. We also have Nick Smith, Senior Vice President, Managed Services at SmartStream Technologies, and Nick is based in New York at present. And as I mentioned, my name is Victor Anderson, and I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. Now, today's event is scheduled to run for approximately 60 minutes and will consist of a panel discussion and 4 poll questions, which I'll push out to audience members during the course of this hour. I'll be grateful if you take the time to respond to each of those questions. Simply click the most appropriate option and you're done. Each poll question will be open for approximately 5 minutes only. Finally, if you do have a question of your own for a member of today's panel, you can direct it via the Q&A box, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. Now, today's synopsis is on the screen in front of you, so I won't go over what you already know. But having said that, I would like to draw your attention to a piece of research on the future of managed services carried out by WatersTechnology on behalf of SmartStream, which found that 73% of respondents to the survey currently have outsourcing relationships, with a third of those having more than 5 current relationships. Almost half of respondents that currently have outsourcing relationships outsource typical back office functions. So that would be reconciliations, collateral management functions, clearing and settlement and accounting. And that is in addition to general IT provision, which they currently get from their outsourcing service provider as well. And then in terms of key benefits, 58% cited reduced operating costs, while 41% said it provided their firms with access to the latest technology or applications, software, and middleware. So there are clearly the key benefits to arranging for a third-party provider to provide these types of services to capital markets firms. Now, WatersTechnology will be producing a white paper covering the findings of the 14-question survey, to which we will alert all audience members today once it has been published. Just a quick disclaimer before we continue. Please note that the views expressed in this webcast are those of the speakers only and do not reflect the official policies or positions of the firms they represent. The end users in this webcast are not affiliated to and do not have a relationship with the sponsor. They do not therefore endorse its products and or its services. Right, now that that's all out of the way, let's meet our panelists today. So before we kick off today's discussion, I'd like to ask John, Joe, and Nick to introduce themselves and let the audience know a little bit about what they do on a day-to-day basis with respect to today's topic of discussion. So to John first, then Joe, and then finally Nick. John.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I'm John Berkery. As you mentioned in the intro, I'm a managing director at Brown Brothers Harriman. I'm currently responsible for our workforce transformation discipline, which is effectively our BPO oversight as well as productivity technology initiatives, including machine learning, artificial intelligence, those types of things. I've been in this role for about a year. Prior to that, I was responsible for our product strategy for our fintech business, as well as other roles such as our global custody product head.
Good, thanks. Joe?
Thanks, Vic. Thanks for inviting me. It's Joe Lodato. I'm the head of compliance technology and surveillance for Guggenheim Partners. Prior to this role, which I've had now for about 4 years, I was the CCO of the investment bank. And one of the things that I realized was that technology was going to play an even greater part in the business going forward. So moved into this role where I help with the strategy as well as do some of the day-to-day surveillance oversight.
Good. Thanks. Nick?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Nick Smith. I joined SmartStream almost 4 years ago now, after a long career working in the investment banks, both in the UK and in Asia. Here at SmartStream, I head up managed services, where we're providing the capability across both back office operations and technology.
Good. Okay, thanks, gentlemen, for that. Right, before we kick off the first of our questions that we're going to be discussing, the first discussion point, what I'd like to do is just open the first poll question to today's audience members. You should see the poll question on your screen in front of you right now. The question reads, is your firm looking to extend its outsourcing arrangements as a result of COVID-19? You have 4 options there. You've got about 5 minutes or so to select the most appropriate option for your organization. And so then what we're going to do in the meantime is we're going to kick off today's discussion. So just for the purposes of today's call, let's talk about, let's get a clear definition of exactly what managed services entails, and typically how managed services differ from the traditional outsourcing model. So what I'd like to do is ask Nick to kick that off, and then Joe and John just to weigh in as well. So what is your understanding from SmartStream's perspective, Nick? If you want to talk a little bit about managed services from as a kind of a solution that you're offering the marketplace, and typically how would that differ, if at all, from the traditional outsourcing model?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Victor. Okay. So from a managed service perspective, I believe that we primarily focus on delivering a process rather than providing an outsourced headcount. As part of delivering that process, everybody, both the provider and the client, are focused on the outcome rather than the number of heads. What the number of heads are going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. It's all focused on the outcome. And those outcomes, they're very clear, they're measurable, and they're managed at SLAs. I remember in the past when I worked for the investment banks where we entered into outsourcing arrangements. I remember where a BPO provider would breach an SLA, and then it would all be about arguing around the small print around the SLA. The managed service providers, it's all about the outcome. And I see that as a very, very clear differentiator.
Okay, good. John, I'm going to ask the same question to you, seeing this is part of your, specifically part of your remit. Do you see it as, similar to the way Nick sees it in terms of the difference between managed services and the traditional outsourcing model?
Yeah, I see it very similarly. For us, traditional outsourcing is about cost, maybe labor arbitrage, scale, maybe filling hours in your global processing day, whereas managed services is more, as was said, outcome-based, and maybe even capability enhancing to the model. So we sort of think of managed services as filling a gap or providing an enhanced capability, as opposed to sort of a workforce labor cost kind of view.
Okay. Joe, from Guggenheim's perspective, how do you see it?
Well, I think a lot of the lines are getting muddled as the industry evolves into breaking apart some of the processes. When you think about the typical outsource, sometimes it was all or nothing. Back offices were being outsourced for a while, and some people's experiences were to bring the back in when they realized that it wasn't working well. But I think now there's so much complexity in the workflows with the technology involved and the services. There's combinations of offshore, onshore technology platforms. So everyone's using that as a managed service, but in reality, more and more people are going to, I need the outcome based, not just a slice of this. I need the whole thing taken care of. And so I think that we're evolving into that, and it's becoming pretty exciting. Good.
Yes, with respect to your comments about outsourcing and bringing it back in-house, there was a kind of a spate around the mid-2000s where all these large projects that had been kind of these massive lift-outs that had been done, suddenly the capital markets firm thought, actually, this isn't really working for us. We're going to need to do this. We're going to need to take hold of it again. And so there was the whole kind of reversal And of course, that costs a huge amount of money, and there's a lot of time, a lot of effort. It's a lot of complexity as well. So yes, this kind of the traditional outsourcing model did get a bit of a bad rep during that time. And as the three of you have explained, we're talking about something completely different now. Not just outsourcing something, but looking at the actual outcome at the end of the day.
Yep.
And Victor,
next question I'd like to.
Can I just add
yes,
that,
of course,
please?
Nick. Yeah.
Just on that period where the banks were doing those big outsourcing models. And again, it touches a little bit on what John referenced a moment ago. It was very much about a labour arbitrage, and that will only get an organisation so far. Trying to reduce the costs around labour, that's fine. We all understand that, but they were still using their legacy technology. They were still using the client's own technology, and that tends to be where a lot of the costs are. And again, that's a key differentiator between an outsource arrangement and a managed service, because sure, we can do labour arbitrage, but a lot of the difference comes from the technology that's available and the real benefits that can drive towards that shared outcome.
Good.
Yeah,
okay.
We used to call that. Sorry to interrupt. We used to call that model "your mess for less."
It's a great way of describing it, I think. Sorry, Joe, I cut across you there for a moment. Do you want to comment?
No, I was just going to say one of the differences from back then to now is, the loss of control. I think more and more people realize, especially with COVID, that things can get done outside of right underneath your roof. And so that's freeing people up a little bit.
Yeah. Actually, that brings us really neatly onto the next discussion point, and we're going to be talking about COVID now. But what I'd like to do is just have a quick look at the responses to the first of our poll questions. The question read, is your firm looking to extend its outsourcing arrangements as a result of its COVID-19 experience? And 42% of respondents said, no, we're happy with our current arrangement, and COVID-19 hasn't really changed that, which is nice, although almost a third, so 28.6% said, yes, we are always looking to outsource functions, and that can be handled more efficiently by a specialist provider, and COVID-19 has added impetus to that strategy, which is something that I've had a large number of conversations with IT folks and ops guys around COVID-19 and how it's kind of stressed their services, their delivery, their IT consumption, all that sort of stuff. And COVID-19 has been a watershed moment for a lot of organizations. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about COVID-19 right now. And so what I'd like to do is ask John first, and then Joe and Nick finally to talk a little bit about, do you want to talk about, just very briefly, about your personal experience with COVID-19 in terms of, how it kind of impacted your business on a day-to-day basis, if you can? And then the second part of that question, and here's the real rub. Are we likely to see a rise in the popularity of managed services as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? In other words, did it expose some firms, and they're kind of doing a stock take right now, saying, you know what, it just doesn't make sense any longer for us to continue to manage this process in-house. We need to look at partnering with a third party. So, John, two aspects to that question, your personal experience, and then are we likely to see a rise in popularity of managed services? And then same question to Joe and then to Nick as well. Let's see whether we can get some interesting anecdotes here. John?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I personally think maybe we're still a little close to COVID to really have formed a solid strategic view on that question yet. But I would say we have been significantly surprised by how much we can do remotely. Our workforce is 95% plus working remote. I know most of our clients and peers are around that level as well. Our expectation going in was something, maybe 75%. So I do think that it's been incredibly effective. Productivity is high, error rates are low, all of those types of things. So I think it's been an eye-opening kind of experience and I've heard that, pretty much everywhere. So I think that has us all thinking about location strategy, operating models, like what are the knock-on implications of that to your workforce and to your operating model. I do think that, as we sort of said in the last question, firms have been moving away from a centralized mindset for quite some time. And this probably is a sort of a land shift of that ties to that. But I also do, personally, and as we talk within my firm, I think we want to wait a little longer and see if there are long-term implications to quality, how we onboard new talent. There's sort of some big questions that I think we need to see more results on before we form more solid strategic views.
Good. Joe, what is your take on that?
Well, the personal experience, we as a firm were pretty much set up to do some remote work, so we just had to scale that quickly. And for 122 days, I've been sitting at my desk at home working, and I would even say working harder, because the lines are blurred when it comes to what you do at home, what you do at work when there's no commute. And I think it's been really seamless for us to people's surprise of, hey, this is really working. Productivity is still high. Now, that's 122 days so far and from New York. But as time goes on, I think there's going to be other knock-on effects. I definitely think firms that didn't have the technology in place had a much harder time, and they're probably thinking about, again, depending on their size, why do I do all this when I can have someone manage all this tech for me and be able to scale as cloud applications come on and things like that. So I think that's going to be a big look. And then the second thing is the people management. We're all home now, and that was kind of novel for a while, but with kids out of school and things like that, it's been challenging to do, work, homeschooling, and all the things you do. And I think over time, people are going to look to actually want to go back to work.
Yeah. Funny enough, I have heard that as well. That it's kind of like they just want to get out of the house, just maybe not 5 days a week, but just get out of the house and go, get to the office and not have to worry about stuff at home for a while.
Exactly, and
so perhaps
that's to your point that 2 or 3 days in the office instead of 5 days in the office.
Yeah. Nick, tell us about SmartStream's experience so far, and have you? And I guess this speaks to the second part of that question. Have you had more conversations let's say, over the course of the last? Joe mentioned he's been out of the office for 120 days. That's 4 months. Have you had more conversations with firms looking to offload various aspects of their day-to-day operations in the last 4 months?
Okay. So a lot of my thoughts echo what Joe and John were just sharing. We're finding ourselves, we're still delivering a quality service. We've not seen any degradation. What was interesting, at the very early stages of the lockdown, we had one of our big clients come to us and ask us if we were going to give them a letter to talk about how some of the SLAs that we'd agreed to, and we may not be able to meet them. And I was like, why would we do that? And they'd actually been receiving it from some of the outsource providers, which I thought was really interesting. But in reality, to echo what the other gentlemen are sharing, is the output has still been of a high quality. We're not seeing any degradation in service. But I think that the offset to that is people are working harder and people are working longer, because there isn't that demarcation between the start of the working day and the end of the working day. And this is one of the things that I'm really seeing. I was talking to one of my existing clients based up in Canada, and I was talking to their head of strategy a few weeks back, and we were just comparing notes, and he said that they were really struggling just managing people remotely. And it wasn't talking about the technology, but it was just purely the people management side. Because we have got some of the challenges around homeschooling, sure, it's about keeping people, with the right amount of focus to actually delivering, the services that they need to. And we're talking about right now, we've gone for a period much longer than what anybody actually anticipated. So, whilst everyone's doing a great job and everybody's working hard, it is starting to put a strain on people. And what we're seeing here within SmartStream is that right now, our pipeline of new clients is stronger than it's ever been in that managed service space. But those clients where we were already in contract negotiations, it's been interesting to see that some of the priorities that they had before have changed, or they're not necessarily changed, but they've been refined. So now I do get questions around, how do we respond to a pandemic, which I guess is not surprising, but 6 months ago, 12 months ago, that question would never have been asked. And then, information security is always a key topic, but now we get a lot of questions around, information security, in a DR situation, how are we managing the security around clients? So, from a pipeline perspective, we're seeing significant growth year on year, but the current, what the business that COVID-19 is generating right now, we're expecting to see that business continue to grow at an exponential rate going into 2021 as well. So, it's sad that it's taken a pandemic like COVID to drive this, but we are seeing how people are looking at changing their operating model.
Yes, from my perspective, what I have heard from a number of people, not only service providers but also service consumers, that what COVID did was it highlighted two key issues, and this is what, and Joe mentioned this. The one is scalability and how important it is to be able to scale almost immediately, and that's what cloud is just so incredibly good at. You just can't really compete with the elasticity offered by the cloud model. And the other is performance as well, and the extent to which you can access applications, platforms, etc., remotely. But is there much degradation in terms of the performance of with your remote access? And those are two key issues that I think a lot of people have. Those people who have been exposed through COVID-19 have found, I think, those are the two key areas where scalability has been an issue and performance too. And so rather than just accessing a cloudified existing application, what they're going to be looking for more and more now is cloud native applications. So, technology developed specifically for the cloud that can provide kind of remote access and high performance remote access to the application itself. Anyway,
Victor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, is that Joe?
Joe.
Yeah.
It's Joe.
Yeah.
The other thing we have to thank is the explosion of smartphones, smart TVs, and streaming, because the infrastructure in our homes was able to handle the workload. I think it's made a big difference. If everybody came home and no one could sign on because they didn't have the bandwidth, or little tricks like don't use your microwave when you're on a web chat because it interferes with it, people would have not had that productivity. And so the consumerism has really helped the business side, which typically wasn't always the case.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. Can you imagine if this had happened 10 years ago? I think, everybody's business would have fallen off a cliff because you just didn't have the infrastructure to enable the kind of immediacy and the access, etc., to platforms. But it just so happened that it happened in 2020, and for most of the developed world and for large parts of the developing world, the infrastructure is there that allows people to continue working irrespective of their location. Brings back the kind of concept of work is something you do, not necessarily a place you go to. Anyway, let's move on to the next poll question. The question should be in front of our audience members now. Which areas of the business do you currently outsource? And we're going to be talking about this ourselves. The question is, it's not in front of you right now. It should be, there it is. Okay, it's updated. Yep. Which areas of the business do you currently outsource? You've got 5 options there. We'd be really keen to hear what most appropriate option is for you there. And we're going to be discussing specifically that issue as well. So I'm going to put this to Joe first, then John, and then to Nick. Typically, Joe, which business processes are capital markets firms looking to offload to outsources or managed service providers, and why specifically is that? So can you kind of provide an idea behind the thinking, the rationale for them actually offloading and establishing relationships with outsourced service providers or managed service providers? And the corollary of that question would be, what functions are they just not prepared to let go of right now? What functions do they absolutely have to manage in-house? Joe?
Sure, thanks. So I think historically, it's always been the back office functions where people didn't see the value when it came to impact on clients. They saw it as process, they saw it as routine, and it was easily measured. So outsourcing was typically easy to do. There was a clear expectation of scale and expertise and things like that. Over time, we're seeing more of the middle office to even in some cases some front office support. I think off the table is a lot of the front office advisory and business functions, because they see that as client facing, and firms are not ready to have, or they don't trust enough that you're not going to steal their clients, right? So they want to keep that sacred. But as like regulatory reporting, it gets more and more complex, and it's getting complex because of the data intensive aspects of it. Those kinds of things are starting to be looked at as, hey, we could outsource this. I mean, a 17H filing is just data, and let's have someone who's really good at data, who have data scientists, things like that, who I may not be able to hire because they don't necessarily want to come work for ABC firm when they can work for bigger firms and do bigger things with data science. Let me tap into that. So I think you're starting to see that movement happen.
Yeah. You also get the economies of scale as well, don't you? Because someone who manages, let's say, regulatory reporting on a daily basis for large numbers of clients, they understand the complexities, the idiosyncrasies, etc., of what is required by the regulators, and so you do get that knock-on, that benefit as being part of a larger kind of a herd, right?
You do. One caveat is, and I'll use that herd example. There's a lot of differentiation in the middle of the pack, right? And not a knock on lawyers, but they tend to think about their view of how that rule should be implemented. So there has to be a lot of give and take, and the companies that do the services have to build that flexibility into their tech platform to be able to say, okay, you want it A, you want it B. It's almost the same, but there's a little difference, and I'll be able to service you for that.
Good. Okay, John, what is your take on what functions capital markets firms are looking to outsource, and what are they not prepared to let go of?
Well, I think I'm pretty much on the same page with Joe. I might make the nuanced point, which is a mature one, that firms are also very focused on what's differentiating and what is a scalable, effective process, and those things they sort of if they have a scalable process that works, they'll retain that, and if it's part of their sort of special sauce in their product, they obviously will protect that very closely. We're seeing maybe just an expansion of those non-differentiating ideas, like customer billing, for example. I think the spectrum of what you can look at is getting a little bit wider. But I also, we think as a bank, we think about the idea as we work with, say, a BPO service provider, do we have proprietary capabilities that, if operated by our BPO provider, could we sort of scale that up as a product, and sell that as a standalone product with more scale, and it kind of eliminates some of the things we wouldn't have sold as a standalone product in the past. I think we can now, and I think that might lead to more of this sort of managed service kind of mindset of if somebody has a really good platform, why not scale it up if you can do that? So it could lead to a little bit of like a fragmentation, the continued evolution away from a platform outsourcing to more of a, if you've got a differentiating capability, try to scale that up.
Good. Okay. Yes. Certain. Yeah, and a point well made. Nick, I'm going to put the same question to you, but kind of turn it on its head very slightly and talk a little bit about What, from SmartStream's perspective, where are you getting your most of your demand from right now in terms of the processes that the capital markets firms, mostly banks in this instance, in this scenario, are looking for you to manage on their behalf? Where is all the demand coming from?
Okay, so it's always going to be from the spaces where there's no competitive advantage. So where they're looking at utility type functions, shared service type functions. One of the places where we do see a lot of growth is in the cloud platform software as a service. And that's driven very much by, clients, if they're having scalability issues, if they're using legacy technology that's struggling with the current market demands, a whole bunch of reasons. So we've seen a lot of growth and demand around the cloud space and software as a service. What we're also seeing, again, more in the technology space rather than the back office operations, is that drive towards excellence. So banks are coming to us trying to tap into, or not trying to, but they are tapping into our specialists, our technology specialists. So if I look at SmartStream, we're not trying to be all things to all people. We are a speciality provider, and we see banks coming to us looking to leverage that knowledge and expertise. And what they're trying to do is that they're looking to reduce their operating costs and also manage their risk and control framework. Nobody wants to increase risk. So we'll also have clients coming to us if they're having some regulatory challenges and they want to improve their risk profile. So whether it's reducing operating costs or managing risk, that tends to be the key drivers, but it's very much focused in the technology space we're seeing, and to a lesser extent, the back office operations. The back office operations, if we think about it, people have already done a lot of that labour arbitrage. They've either outsourced the headcount, or what they've done is they've moved to their own offshore centres or their own nearshore centres to reduce that operational headcount. So what they're now doing is they're looking to say, well, what else can I do to improve my outcomes, to improve my operating costs, and to manage some of that risk profile that I've got today. So that's where we've seen the real growth. And what we're SmartStream, we're not seeing really much of is anything that would be client-facing for one of the banks, or something that would give one of the banks a competitive advantage. So it's very much in that back end, but honestly, the growth in the software as a service platform, that's growing exponentially at the moment.
Good. I think we'll get an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that in due course. I'd like to circle back very briefly to the responses to our second poll question. The responses should be on the screen now. Okay. The question was, which areas of the business do you currently outsource? So the front and middle office didn't get any responses at all, but I need to refresh. Yes, okay. The responses are refreshed. They're in front of me now. So various back office functions, reconciliation, collateral management, clearing, settlement, accounting, etc. That received just under 40%, and also just under 40% was general IT provision and day-to-day technology support, which incidentally is consistent with a very similar question we asked our respondents to the survey that we were running on behalf of SmartStream as well. So the two key areas are various back office functions and also general IT provision and day-to-day technology support. Okay, I'm going to open the third poll question up to today's audience members. What do you see as the key benefits to outsourcing certain functions? You've got 4 options there. You've got 5 minutes or so to respond. Thank you very much indeed for sending us your responses to the first 2 poll questions. This is the third now. You've got 4 options there. And we're going to continue our conversation. We've talked about the benefits to outsourcing. That's clear. And we did actually have a kind of discussion point around how do capital markets firms make the business case to enter relationships with managed service providers. We're not going to deal with that because we've already dealt with that already. It's quite clear. Let's talk about the areas that capital markets firms tend to underestimate in terms of complexity when entering into managed service relationships. In other words, what are the potential drawbacks of such arrangements? John, I'm going to put that to you then. Let's mix it up and go with Nick second, and finally Joe. If you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about what are the potential pitfalls of such initiatives. John? Hello, John. Are you with us?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem, John. You got the question, did you?
Yeah, I did. So I
okay, good. All right.
It's a really critical question, and it's something that we consistently hear. And to me, there's a large answer, and it's how all of these processes come together, especially into a data strategy. Almost all firms, whether banks, asset managers, our clients and peers, I know everyone is sort of thinking about their data strategy driven by regulation, driven by scale, cost, all of these considerations. And so how the pieces come together, I do think that outsourcing is moving towards, and managed services is moving towards more modularization of these processes, but how it all comes back together into a firm's data strategy is just really, 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 really critical. And so how you reconcile that data, how you control that data, the timing of that data, the lineage of the data, all of those things, it is very complicated. And it's something that I think you have to know how the picture will look before you start down any specific path. And to me, that's, the big one that's in the room.
Okay. So essentially we're talking about all the classic kind of data management type scenarios, lineage, control, transparency, making sure there's no duplication, clean data, all that sort of stuff, and how it all kind of, as you mentioned, how it all fits together is a critical component that needs to be managed properly.
That's right. Yeah. And if you think about the sort of traditional BPO model where, you sent the back office and they operated your old technology with their cheaper resources, but there was a lot of stuff done outside of the platform in macros and Excel spreadsheets. How that data all comes together, it just can't happen. Yep.
Okay, good. Nick, do you want to talk a little bit about specifically those points that John mentioned?
Yes.
How does SmartStream alleviate a lot of the anxiety around those problems?
So I was really interested then to understand about the references to the strategy, because I see the same as well. And I will see an organization using maybe 3, maybe even 4 outsourced providers and just trying to bring it all together. And when I see that, I see clients are operating in a very much a tactical manner rather than a strategic manner or working with a holistic view. And that really comes back to that target operating model. And that's one of the challenges I see clients struggling with. Some clients, at a very senior management level, they can see the target operating model, but culturally and from a communication perspective, that's not necessarily communicated to the people that are actually trying to deliver it. So one of the challenges that I often come across is just a resistance to change, that people are still thinking it's the same job that they were doing, but now somebody else is doing it, rather than a complete change in approach, a complete change in strategy, because we're trying to improve, the outcomes that they were delivering themselves. And trying to get that mindset accepted, quite often we find that a challenge for the people that are being tasked to deliver the introduction of managed services into an organization. So
okay.
Joe, what is very much focused on the change management and culture.
Good. Okay. Thanks, Nick. Joe, what is your take on that issue, on the whole, this kind of, in order to do it properly, you've got to make sure that you get a good, clear view of the kind of the bigger picture, really.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think initially in the honeymoon period, most of the conversations are over-promising and under-delivering, and so they put themselves in a position to fail a lot of times, a lot of vendors. But, that's number one. So, go in with clear eyes. This is not going to be an easy thing to do, but it's worth it if you do it right. And then the second thing is, as we move to data-driven management trends, more and more people are understanding how to use data to be competitive. And as more and more competition from startups going after the ingrained groups, do not let your data be kept hostage. You need to have access to that data, and sometimes that gets lost in the mix.
Good, good. Actually, that's going to bring us on to the next discussion point. We're going to be talking about data security and access to the data once it has left the organization. So keep your thoughts in mind, gentlemen, while we have a look at the responses to the third poll question. What do you see as the key benefits to outsourcing certain functions? The answers of which, the results of which are it's fairly evenly split between reducing operating costs, that was just under 28%, also the same percentage, access to the latest technology, application, software and or middleware, and then finally streamlining, simplifying the business so that we can focus on our core functions. So there was a kind of a fairly even spread across those three main answers. Final poll question. Let's open the final poll question to today's audience members. What do you see as a potential drawbacks to outsourcing parts of the business? We've already discussed this, but it'll be really interesting to hear what you have to say. And we will continue our discussion around what a capital, the question is, how important are security concerns as it pertains to outsourcing managed service relationships? Or are such concerns now largely taken care of due to enhanced security measures and or best practices? Joe, you mentioned this, and I'd like you to kick off this this point, please. So talk a little bit about security concerns, and allied to that, also about the whole kind of control mentality. People, firms worried about losing control once they've once data has left the organization and is with a partner. Do you want to talk a little bit about have those issues been overblown, and are they overestimated, or are they still potentially things that keep CIOs awake at night?
I think they're still keeping CIOs awake at night. As we look towards the tech environment and security around it, there is a lot of complexity. One of the biggest gaping holes in security for IT is not the computers themselves. Oftentimes it's the people. So now you have a process where your data is in the hands of other people, and that managed service has to make you feel comfortable that you are more diligent than the firm themselves. In cases of leaks or data loss prevention, phishing, where one administrative ID taken is the keys to the kingdom, you have to make sure they're as diligent as you are, if not more, because it'll really mess up their business if they have an event. So when it comes to security, it's a big topic. But having said that, as the regulators have told us in the regulated entities, you treat them as if they're yours. So you have to make sure they're doing as much, if not more, than you're doing when it comes to security.
Mm-hmm. I suppose a way of rebutting that argument, or at least countering that argument, is basically saying, yes, but you have your own employees, and they have, a lot of the times whenever there are data leaks, it's disgruntled employees. You tend not to have that with a third party, right? Because there is no they have no dog in the fight. Whereas when you get, internal staff members who are pissed off with management, or unhappy with their roles or whatever, that's a huge potential for data leaks, right?
Well, no, I'll disagree with you a little bit on that, because anybody can get disgruntled. I mean, you're talking to a surveillance guy, right? So I believe the world is all disgruntled. But I'm paid to be paranoid. And so at any given moment, in any given situation, a good employee can become a bad employee. And I think the risks are still the same. Anybody who wants to get back at their firm gets back at their firm.
Yep. Yep, good. Okay, I think it's a fair point, and also as head of compliance, you see it from a slightly, and also surveillance, you see it as from a slightly kind of different perspective than typically anybody else in the industry would. And so, yeah, I appreciate your commentary there. John, do you want to have a stab at that question as well, and just talk a little bit about security concerns and also losing control of your data, the anxiety around that for from senior IT managers?
I mean, I would say that probably is the single largest, concern that we have. It's huge in terms of just so many aspects of the business. And I agree with Joe's points. I also think of, the digitization of data. While it's empowering, anyone who's attempted to interact with like an API, there are now API service contracts and very detailed contracts about the use of data. Your data that you're providing could be used in different ways that you didn't expect. You need to think about not only, data privacy and those types of things, but reuse of market data is a major issue. So it is a very, very complex thing. There's a lot of liability in terms of regulatory, in terms of market, your reputation. So it is. I think it's a big issue, and it continues to be, and I would expect it to be for some time. I mean, it's something that we certainly spend a lot of time focusing on it. And just to the point about sort of access to employee data, we've invested. The market is moving quickly, and as you think about your technology stack, we're all want to add new capabilities, differentiating capabilities, and some of these exciting things. But we've invested very, very heavily in things like limitations on all-by-all types of views, the right eyes, seeing very limited data, seeing only the data they should get. That's been a major area of investment for us for 5, 6, 7 years. And I know our peers and clients are thinking the same way.
Good. Okay. Nick, I'm going to put the same question to you. So to what extent are you hearing those concerns from either prospective clients or existing clients? And typically, how does SmartStream go about allaying those fears?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So as a managed service provider, we're always responding to RFPs as an example, or even when we're entering into an engagement, we have lots of questions coming to us, and it's always the information security piece that's by far the largest. Which for me, that tells me how much of a priority it is. But also, if we can't meet those information security requirements, it's a deal breaker when it comes. There's no two ways about it. So then we look at it from a number of different angles. Right? So sure, we talk about cyber security, we talk about information security, we talk about physical security, and obviously the people. The people are always a risk, but there's a lot of things that we can do to alleviate that. But if I take a step back and I look at where the world is today to where it was just a couple of years ago, I can see how globally, holistically, everybody's evolved and changed their expectations of how they're operating. So we have so SmartStream, we typically offer a single tenancy platform. There's other institutions out there that will offer multi-tenancy platforms, and then the risk profile changes as well. And then it comes down to an organization as to how do they weigh the risk versus operating cost. Sure, if you work off a multi-tenancy platform, you can reduce your operating costs, but how important is that data security to you? And are you prepared to pay a little bit more for that? So I see it from different aspects. But again, just going back to the cloud. The evolution and the growth of the cloud platforms. 10 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago, people were stepping back and saying, "I'm not too sure about the cloud. I'm not too sure about the security." I'm from the north of England, and my parents only started embracing online shopping a year or two ago because they were worried about security. I don't think they'd heard of Amazon before. But my point being is, as the cloud is grown and developed, so is a lot of security around it as well. But it takes a lot of investment, it takes a lot of oversight, and it takes a lot of management just to make sure that you make things as tight as possible. But protecting client data is the be-all and end-all when it comes down to it. And we see that in all of our existing client engagements.
Yeah, yeah. I should imagine from a third party's perspective, your reputational risk, the damage that you will suffer as a result of breaches is just something that must keep you awake at night as well, because you will lose potential possibly even existing clients based on breaches. And so not only from a user's perspective, but also a provider's perspective, data integrity, security, etc., is absolutely critical.
And Victor, that what you just touched on there, it's not just about breaches, it's about resilience as well. It doesn't take a breach to compromise a client's data. So making sure that there's robust resilience around protecting that client's data.
Good. Okay. All right, gents, let's move on. We'll keep the fourth poll question open for a couple more minutes. And everybody's been talking, well, the three of you have been talking about the cloud. So let's move on to the cloud and talk about the extent to which cloud has become a competitive differentiator when it comes to selecting a managed service partner. Should firms be looking for cloud-native applications that offer the scalability, performance, etc., over traditional cloudified platforms? That is, platforms that were designed to be used and housed in data centers and then just cloudified and put into the cloud, which don't typically provide the performance and the accessibility that the ease of accessibility that cloud-native applications do. So to what extent does cloud become a competitive differentiator? I'm going to put this to Joe first. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Joe, then John, and finally Nick as well? And you can also, Nick, you can talk a little bit about SmartStream's cloud initiative. Joe?
Sure, thanks. Yep. I believe the competitive differentiator of the cloud is amazing. If you're not looking at cloud-designed applications, you lose that scalability, that resiliency, even that security. There's a lot to lose. Amazon has a lot to lose if somebody hacks into Amazon. Now, you would argue that's the biggest. Right. Amazon Web Services is one of the biggest, and Microsoft Azure is one of the biggest, and they're going to put a lot of resource to protect themselves, and people are going to try to go in and hack them. But at the same time, I can't put those resources to bear, right? So the cloud, as people are learning more and more in their own lives, it's safer, it's easier, it's accessible anywhere. We're getting more and more services on it. I just think you have to be there as a mainstay.
Yep. Do you think at some point in the future, Joe, you might not be able to answer this, but have a stab at it anyway. Do you see an organization like Guggenheim living entirely in the cloud at some point in the future?
I can't say, when you say an organization like Guggenheim, I see organizations.
Okay, so let's not talk about your organization, but do you see similar sell-side organizations living entirely, in the cloud, so kind of totally cloud-based organizations where you don't have any data center, you don't have access to any data centers at all. Everything is kind of in the cloud, and all you're doing is accessing cloud-based applications.
It'll depend on size, right? So if you're Goldman Sachs or Bank of America, you have scale, you could have your own data centers. If you're a smaller firm, it doesn't make sense to have your own data centers.
Yep.
You don't want to be in the data center business. You want to be in the financial services business.
Right. Good point. Okay, John, I'm going to put the same question to you, not about whether organizations are going to live in the cloud in the future, but to what extent do you see cloud as a competitive differentiator when it comes to selecting a managed service partner?
I mean, I agree with Joe. I mean, I think cloud is very important. I mean, if I look at Brown Brothers architecture, and we spend a lot of time talking about this, we have a hybrid private cloud model where we have some elements are in the cloud and some are not. And I think of our view, and this kind of comes into the second question that you asked, is our view is that, if you use like a nautical military kind of analogy, that an Amazon type of web services type of approach is an aircraft carrier where, we might operate more as a destroyer that's, maybe nimble, not as large in terms of scale and capabilities, but more nimble and also not as much of a target, for those looking to do harm. So we think about it a lot. I think surely it's hard to argue against the benefits of cloud-based applications, but there is a lot to think about when you think about your strategy, and it's something we spend a lot of time talking about.
Yep. Good. And is there any reason why your hybrid approach, that means you've got a kind of a BBH cloud, and you're also using a public cloud, and you kind of have a blend of both? Is that right?
I would say, yeah, because we as a bank operating in multiple domiciles, we have a lot of consideration about client data in the cloud, and it's complicated. But certainly within specific applications and managed services, it makes sense, and we're comfortable operating within a cloud. So we have sort of a configurable environment that leverages the benefits of the cloud when it makes sense for us. But we also like the control of a private cloud.
Okay, good. All right, a final point to Nick then. Nick, do you want to talk a little bit about SmartStream's cloud strategy and the extent to which I understand that SmartStream is in the process of developing cloud-native versions of all its existing applications, and so to what extent are clients looking for that sort of such a strategy, so cloud-native applications? And do you want to also talk just generically about SmartStream's strategy in this space?
So, and so some great points there, Victor. So SmartStream, we're well known for continuously investing in our products. We spend around 25% of our revenue back into R&D. And right now, where we're moving from is the cloudification of our software products, where we're running them as a software as a service business, into making them cloud native. So we're steadily moving towards using technologies like Docker and Kubernetes. We love the serverless computing capabilities out there, Azure and AWS have got out there. We love for AWS Fargate. And what that really does for us is that's really making our technology much more flexible, much more scalable. But again, it's reducing our operating costs. By reducing operating costs, it reduces our pricing, makes everybody happy. But we can talk generally speaking, but a couple of real life case studies for you. So if we look at Vanguard, you can look this up on YouTube. Jeff Dowd spoke at AWS's annual conference last year at reInvent, and it's a really interesting presentation that Vanguard did at AWS reInvent, because he talks about the journey that Vanguard went on. It's traditionally a little bit of a conservative organization, about how they got their head around moving towards the cloud, how they had a cloud strategy, and then partway through delivering that strategy, they had a rethink and they changed direction, and they're very open and honest about it in this presentation at AWS reInvent. So I found that really informative and a great insight as to how people are constantly evolving and changing. But then I can take you to another client of SmartStream's, where they're an on-premise client today, but suddenly their volumes on the retail side of the business, they were growing at a ridiculous rate, and they could see how their on-premise instance just didn't have the scale to grow with their retail business. So then they step forward and they come to SmartStream and start having cloud conversations, because they know the cloud gives us that scalability. At a moment's notice, we can evolve and develop at very short notice. We can be very, very agile. But then I go back to other organizations, and what we talked about a moment ago is we also have conversations with banks about moving our software onto their private cloud. So they are still trying to retain full ownership. They still want to have that high level of control. So there are organizations who've got different appetites, whether it's going full on to public cloud, use themselves, moving to their own private cloud, or moving to a software as a service provider. But banks have got multiple legacy platforms. They've got a challenge around making sure that they've got the right skill sets in the organization, and making sure they've got the right capacity, making sure that they're not trying to fit square pegs into round holes. I'm a strong believer of basically the capabilities of the cloud, and a lot of the problems that it solves for organizations. I could bore everybody for a long time with different case studies, but we sit back and we look at what problems people are trying to solve. Cloud, whether it's private cloud or public cloud, can fix a lot of those challenges.
Good. I think it's a great point to leave today's discussion. So thanks very much for that, Nick. What I'd like to do is just very briefly circle back to the final poll question to see if we got any answers from today's audience members. What do you see as potential drawbacks of outsourcing parts of your business? 56% of respondents said managing large numbers of complex, time-consuming relationships. That then draws to an end our discussion, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all very much indeed for your time. Thank you for bearing with us. To Jonathan Berkery, John, thank you for sitting on this panel. John is Managing Director, Investor Services for BBH in New York. Joe Lodato, Managing Director, Global Head of Compliance, Technology and Surveillance at Guggenheim. Nick Smith, who represented SmartStream Technology, he is Senior Vice President of Managed Services. There are two other people I'd like to thank very briefly: Sabrina Lord for taking care of all the technical aspects of this webcast, and Pamela McKay for her fantastic production of this event. Thank you all very much indeed for your expertise, your time, etc. And also thank you to today's audience members for tuning into this webcast. As I mentioned, my name is Victor Anderson. It's been my pleasure to be with you for the last hour. I look forward to catching up with you in the not too distant future. Thank you.